Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be covering symbols and conventions and also some note-taking tips for how to mark up your ICD-10. This lecture is not going to be all-inclusive. There's going to be several things that I'm not going to be able to cover, but I'm going to try to hit the highlights. So do make sure you are carefully reading your textbook, participating in the discussion, and reading all the supplemental materials. All right, so what is the purpose of symbols and conventions? So symbols and conventions are all the little dots and notes and guidance that you're going to get in the ICD-10 manual, okay? And the purpose of these symbols or conventions is not to complicate matters or send you on a wild goose chase. They're actually to help you select the correct code as quickly and efficiently as possible. Symbols and conventions are going to play a big part in how well you can get through that national exam. And there are specific questions on the national exam that are designed to ensure you know how to follow those conventions, okay? So the better we understand them, the better we can use them to quickly code and pass that national exam. All right, so I'm just going to go through the most common ones that we'll see, and then I'll give you a few examples for each one. So red stop sign, this is going to be the most common symbol you're going to see in the ICD-10. And it is right here. You can see next to a 00 cholera, there's a red stop sign. So that means that the code requires additional characters. You cannot use this code as is. You would never use a 00 because it is an incomplete code. So this is basically just like the top of the category. So you would only be able to use these indented codes underneath because they do not have a red stop sign next to them. So this is saying the A00 is the general code, and then the more specific codes are underneath. So you can select one of those. Use additional code. So this is a note that you'll see fairly frequently, and it indicates that the code likely should be reported along with another code. They might also say if applicable, and that would be dependent on the circumstance. So for here, I have a quick example. So we're going to have atypical virus infections of the central nervous system. It says use additional code to identify dementia with behavioral disturbance or dementia without behavioral disturbance. So that is indicating that if dementia exists and is related to these atypical viral infections, you would use those codes additionally, along with whatever A81 code you're going to use. And you'll notice here, A81 has a stop sign next to it, so you cannot use the A81 by itself. And so there's likely several codes listed underneath here that would be more specific. But what this note, this use additional code, is directing you to do is to read the progress note, the patient's notes, and identify if dementia is present. And if it is, you need to also use a code to specify that dementia is present. And that might be dementia with behavioral disturbance or without. So basically, it's the saying commonly when patients have this diagnosis, they commonly also have dementia. And so you may need to use this additional code along with it. So it's just a little helpful tool to make sure you are coding as completely and specifically as possible. All right, code first. You will see this fairly often, and this indicates that you must use another code before you use the current code. So say you've looked up this code here, B97.4, and you see this note that's going to say code first the related disorder. So this is saying that this code itself generally does not exist on its own. It is usually related to another condition. And so that is telling you need to code first those related disorders. So you would not, so that code first is very literal. You would list these codes before you listed B97.4. And it is giving you good direction there. Sorry, let me switch back. It's giving you a good direction to other codes that are likely related. So if you know that this condition is the cause of the upper respiratory infection, you would list the upper respiratory infection first and then B97.4. Includes. So you'll see this note underneath a main term or a more general code, and it's just letting you know that this condition is also included in these codes. So it's just like maybe another name for the same condition or something that's very, very closely related to it. So like you can see here, dystonia, it's going to include all the codes for dystonia are also going to include dyskinesia. And so that's just saying these two conditions are so similar and so closely related, all the same codes apply. So it's just giving you a little help there. NEC or not elsewhere classified. You also might see not elsewhere classifiable. That means that a more specific code is not available. This means, when you're reading the patient note or, maybe just the question in your workbook, it's providing a very, very specific diagnosis, and maybe a code for that specific diagnosis does not exist, but something very similar exists. And we're using this NEC as a catch-all for all the very, very similar conditions that are covered by this code. All right, so as you can see here, we have a more general code here, it's other congenital malformations. So that's going to be kind of a catch-all code, all other congenital malformations of the uterus. And then the specific anomaly is marked as NEC. So if you have this anomaly, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, it would be covered under this code. All right, so that's what NEC means. So it means there's not a specific code for this diagnosis, but you can use this code as kind of a catch-all. NOS, and these two get confused a lot, but they are quite different. NOS means not otherwise specified, and that's really the same thing as unspecified. So that means it's a much more general term. If you look here in the example, sickle cell anemia, not otherwise specified. So that's going to be a very, very general diagnosis because there's all kinds of different complications or varieties of sickle cell anemia, and not otherwise specified. So it's just an unspecified general condition. Okay, so you will either see in the ICD-10, you'll either see unspecified or NOS. Excludes one. So there's two different excludes notes that you can see under a diagnosis or under a code, and they're very different. So excludes one means the condition that's listed there should never be coded at the same time as the above code. So excludes one, these conditions here, DiGeorge syndrome, and all of these should not be coded alongside this primary code or any of the subterms underneath it. It means this category, these are two very different conditions. They should not be coded together. Okay. Now excludes two means that the code here does not include these conditions, but they could both exist at the same time. So as you see in this note, there could be other conditions that are closely related, but this code does not cover them. So it means, hey, you might need to go use codes from category E89 because it's not covered under this code, but you might be using both at the same time. So that's the difference between those two. And you will see both of these very often. So they're very helpful because occasionally you will get directed to a code, and then you will see the excludes one, list what you're actually looking for, and it will direct you right to that code. And so then you're able to go use that, and for sure you cannot use that main code that you were initially looking at. And then with excludes two, it's going to let you know, hey, these are two closely related, but they're not covered under the same code. All right, code also. So a code also note, it indicates that two codes might be required to fully code this condition. And so if you look here at the example I have, so it says, carnitine deficiency due to inborn errors of metabolism. So there's this deficiency that's due to these metabolism errors. So the code also note is saying, hey, you need to also code whatever those errors are so you can fully describe the condition. So you wouldn't just use this code by itself. You probably need to go ahead and use the errors that are causing this condition. Okay. Now, this is not a requirement always. It doesn't mean you have to, because occasionally you don't have all that information, but it's just a guidance for you. Oh, let's switch back. All right, the red X. So we will get lots of practice with this, but basically it means that a space holder is required for this code. It means that this code requires a certain number of characters in order to be used, and an additional character is needed. So what does that mean? So here we're looking at E13.37, and it tells you, so this is other specified diabetes with diabetic macular edema resolved following treatment. So it tells you, okay, this is diabetes with macular edema, which is an eye condition. So it's telling you that you, here at the bottom, you need to indicate if the macular edema occurred in the right eye, the left eye, bilateral, which means both eyes, or if we don't know, an unspecified eye. However, we also know that this code requires 7 characters. So right here. So what we are going to do is use an X to, here, might be more simple if I just write it out. So when we use this code, we're going to have 7 characters, but there are not 6 characters already in order for us to add this final 7th character. So we'll have to use a space holder. Here's how we would do that. So say we wanted to say it was macular edema in the right eye. So for that, we would go E13.37 X1. And that tells us, so we use this X placeholder, and now we have 7 characters. If we hadn't, we would just have 6 characters. It would be an incorrect code. It's going to get kicked back. We have this X here. Now we have 7 characters. So this code requires 7 characters, and the X is indicating you will need to use a placeholder. All right. Okay. So this orange half circle or half moon, this indicates that the code is referencing a manifestation. So this means that the condition that's listed in the code is the manifestation or the result of another condition. So another code might be required. That's all that means. So for this example, it says diabetes mellitus due to underlying condition with hyperosmolarity. This is a whole bunch of very difficult words I'm not going to try to pronounce and embarrass myself. But what it's saying is, this half circle says, the diabetes is due to an underlying condition. So this diabetes is the result of a different condition. And so you might need to be coding that other condition right here, this NKHHC. Okay, so that's what that means. It is not, again, forcing you to use another code. It's just a guide to help you identify, hey, I might need another code here. And then the last one here is and this can be a little confusing, but it's just helpful to understand that when you see the word and in a code description, it means that there's 2 closely related conditions. And so the that you're looking at and all the codes in that section could refer to both, or it could be refer to either one. So for like this example, we have iodine deficiency related thyroid disorders and allied conditions. So it could be referring to all of these, or it could be referring to one or either. Okay, so it just means these conditions are all super related, and so they're all together. So if only one of them applies to you, if you're only looking at iodine deficiency related thyroid disorders and none of the allied conditions, that's fine. If you're only looking at the allied conditions, then that's fine too. Both work together. It could be either or both. That's all that means. And as you get more practice with that, that'll make more sense. All right, the last thing I wanted to cover with you guys is note taking. So note taking is super important when you are using your ICD-10 and all your manuals, really. Anything that you have written in your book, you can use as a reference in the national exam. So it's so important that you are consistently from the very beginning writing in your book in an organized and thoughtful way. It's a huge benefit to you. In fact, the number one regret that I hear from my students as they're getting close to the national exam is that they did not write enough notes in the beginning. I've had students who have written their own notes in a separate notebook with the idea that they would transfer them into their manuals later, and that's really blown up in their face. They've really been disappointed at the end because then they're trying to remember, why did I write this? Which section did it apply to? Or I've had students that were just scared to write in their book. They don't want to write in their book. And then when they get to the national exam, they realize, oh, if I had given myself some tips here, this would have been so much easier. So writing notes from the very beginning is your best bet at being really successful on that national exam. Okay. Some tips that I have for that is to create a table of contents for your notes. Use the blank pages and empty space throughout the manual, and keep track of which pages you are writing specific notes on. So keep similar notes grouped together, and then have a table of contents so you can quickly reference it. You need to use a really consistent and easy to read style, and don't write everything. You shouldn't be writing 10 sentences about how to code HIV. You should be writing bullet points and quick references, so that way when you're in the exam, you can flip right to that page and give yourself all the hints that you need and quickly answer those questions. You only have about 2 minutes per question. So you don't have time to read 5 sentences. Same thing with if you're going to write some medical terminology, that's super helpful, but keep it focused on things you'll actually really need and you really have a problem with. If you already know a lot of suffixes or different types of words, don't write them in there just in case, write the words that you really have a hard time remembering, right? The very similar words that you have a difficult time differentiating. Just keep your notes focused. Okay. And I am going to kind of show you quickly how I do that. Okay, so here is our manual. And again, this is a new manual, so I haven't written a lot in it. But if you look here at the very first page, there's a dedication. And then here I have a table of contents. And I'm going to start writing. Anytime I write notes, I will write the page number here and what it is that I'm talking about. So on page 11, I've written some notes about symbols and conventions. So we can flip up to Roman numeral page 11, and you can see here I've written my notes. And you'll notice I've not written every single thing related to symbols and conventions. I had a whole bunch of things on the slides that I didn't include here. I've just written the ones that were hardest for me to remember. So I have that here, and I've still got space here in case I want to come back and add some additional things, or if I want to add something that's maybe only sort of related to this, I can do that. And then I will come back to my table of contents and write it in here. Okay. So this is what I'm going to challenge you to start doing as soon as possible. Go ahead and start writing in your book, make yourself a table of contents, and just, jump into it. It's going to be okay, I promise. So that's all I have for this video. If you do have questions about the symbols and conventions, if any of these other conventions that were mentioned either here in your manual, and this is the section where it's listed in case you're confused or where you can read everything that I just talked about. But if you have any questions about any of the other conventions that are listed, please post that in the discussion and we can talk about it some more. All right. Thank you all.